District of Conservation is sponsored by the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, better known as CFACT. To learn more about our sponsor, head over to cfact.org. Thanks for listening to the program. Welcome to District of Conservation. I'm your host, Gabriella Hoffman. This podcast offers a sober examination into all things hunting, fishing, shooting sports, energy, environment, and the public policy surrounding it. And this podcast also specializes in original interviews that you won't hear elsewhere. Here's what I have for you today. Welcome to a special Tuesday roundup of the podcast. I'm going to be touching upon the sudden death of Western Caucus Chairman Congressman Doug LaMalfa. I'm also going to talk about Venezuela briefly from an energy and conservation standpoint, and I'm going to end things on a more positive note about my experience seeing the 250 Freedom National Monument Illumination show and fireworks finale that happened last night. Very cool stuff. So we're going to break down these topics for you now. I got a text from my sister who used to work in Congress about the passing of California Congressman Doug LaMalfa. And Congressman LaMalfa had been a 7-time representative of California's 1st district. It's a northern district, very rural district. My sister had met him on many occasions when she worked in Congress, 2013, 2014. He was famous for having pancake gatherings where staffers of like-minded offices or nearby offices would go. I believe they were held on Wednesdays. And she always told me how she fondly remembers those pancake breakfasts. I believe they were held on Wednesdays, as they were held at the time, if I recall correctly. Congressman LaMalfa, as I mentioned in the introduction, was the Congressional Western Caucus chair for the House of Representatives. I believe I met him at least once in all these years I've lived in the D.C. area, and we were connected on social media for a very, very long time. It's shocking. I think D.C. and the surrounding area and the whole country is in shock that he just passed away so suddenly. People are looking at it politically, saying that Republicans have fewer members in their majority. That is a problem. That is absolutely true. I want to kind of examine for a few minutes why it's a big loss for these energy conservation issues. As chair of the Western Caucus, he was leading efforts to represent Western voices in Washington, D.C. So if you work in politics, whether you're here domestically or internationally and you've had meetings in D.C., chances are you've met with representatives and members of Congress who belong to the Western Caucus. The West is home to the majority of public lands in the United States. The West has a lot of issues with forest management, water quality, and the like. We've seen energy battles play out there between renewables, conventional. Congressman LaMalfa was very involved in opposing and drawing a light to the dam removal that happened in Northern California and some of the implications with that. And when he spoke to a reporter I know at the Daily Caller about the millions of young salmon that were killed in the process of removing the dams, he was also a rice farmer, big-time fixture in politics, especially on the Republican side. And he did get along with people on the opposite side of the aisle, too, from what I'd heard and what I remember. He was rightfully critical of climate alarmism. He supported hunting and fishing. He frequently supported expanding public lands access to new opportunities. He supported a lot of landmark legislation. He wanted to see balance restored at various different agencies, especially Bureau of Land Management and other agencies that govern and oversee public lands out west. He really got along well with farmers. I've seen farming accounts eulogizing and memorializing him. So he had a pretty big reach. I want to offer my thoughts and prayers to his family, staffers, and colleagues. It's a tremendous loss in Washington, D.C., across the river. Someone will have big shoes to fill, especially in the role left vacant now with his passing. Let's move on to Venezuela. A lot of people are dismissing the deposing of Nicolas Maduro as simply a quest for oil or an American quest to seize oil assets. And where does Venezuela fit into the podcast? That's where I'm going to get to momentarily. Venezuela has the largest deposit of proven reserves of oil and gas in the whole entire world. The quality of crude oil, however, is different than the United States, and I would argue that American crude and American gas is much more superior. But because of decades of authoritarianism, the so-called warmth of collectivism we keep hearing about from the new New York City mayor, we saw those oil and gas activities being a Trojan horse for narco-terrorist activities. Many of those exports were going to China, Russia, and Iran. President Trump announced that the U.S. is going to temporarily take over the oil and gas industry of Venezuela. If you are a student of history, you'll know that America had involvement in Venezuela's oil and gas industry before. In fact, we were the country that came in and brought enterprise with respect to this industry, taught the Venezuelans how to do oil and gas development, and let them run with it until the dictators came to power. They argued that Venezuela's activities, weaponizing oil and gas, was a threat to the United States, this administration. And I tend to agree with that sentiment in terms of the threat they pose to the Western Hemisphere, which is why the United States, with the Trump administration coming back into office, has prioritized shoring up more domestic oil and gas. Before the Venezuela operation, this is true and this will remain true. I've been talking to various different media outlets, most recently with Fox Business for work, analyzing and offering commentary as to what happens next. So far, we do not see an effect on domestic gas prices, what you're filling at the pump. Gas is now averaging nationally about $2.76 a gallon. We also are seeing energy stocks rising, oddly enough. A lot of people had forecasted that if he were to be removed from office, if Maduro, the dictator, were to be removed from office, we would see these skyrocketing oil and gas prices in the markets, and we would see it reflected in the gas pump at your gas station. That so far is not true. If and when the United States seizes control of the industry, I told Fox Business that it needs to become private again. And privatization is good, and that's something we can argue here at the show, and I do argue here frequently. I think socialism is diametrically opposed to conservation and energy development. You can't have central planning and a robust energy market and conservation practices. Socialists are terrible caretakers of the environment. If you look anywhere where socialism has been tried, it does not work. And that was very evident in Venezuela. I'm going to go into the wildlife component because I think it's interesting with Venezuela having so much biodiversity. The Maduro regime, unsurprisingly, was a terrible steward of the environment, and especially that of biodiversity. So no, not everything is about oil. Oil plays a role, but people in Venezuela wanted freedom. Their oil and gas industry, with U.S. involvement, will probably bounce back. It's not going to be immediate. And when I was referring to the short term in my interviews, I was not saying within exactly 6 months to a year. It'll take years to rebuild. American companies like Chevron and ExxonMobil are interested in going back there. I don't think this displaces American interests or other countries that are allies of ours that are also in the oil and gas industry business. Yet this supplier to hostile nations, countries that are not our friends, the aforementioned China, Russia, Iran, and the like, they will be weaker as a result of this. And energy is playing a bigger role, a more outsized role in foreign policy and national security affairs. And we're seeing energy used for negotiations with economic deals as well. Recently, Reuters reported that for the first time ever of any country, the United States became the first world nation to export over 100 million metric tons of liquefied natural gas in a single year last year. Approximately 111 MMT, meaning that we are now the world's top LNG exporter. Our biggest client and recipient was none other than the European Union. A lot of countries have been buying our LNG to wean themselves, rightfully so, off of Russian oil and gas. That's a smart move, not simply because I'm American and think they should solely buy from us, but a lot of these European countries, normally those out west, Spain, Belgium, especially come to mind, Hungary, Slovakia, they talk about, we're going to stand up to Putin and we're going to oppose the war. Hungary and Slovakia have taken other positions, unfortunately. In 2027, the EU claims they're going to wholly wean themselves off of Russian oil and gas, and that's great. That should have been done years ago. But the other flip side of the thing is they're not only funding both sides of the war, but their rush to go net zero, as I've talked about here at length, also invited their reliance on Russian oil and gas instead of buying American oil and gas or restarting or looking closer to home. A lot of European countries are actually buying from Norway, which has a treasure trove of oil and gas reserves, proven reserves. The United Kingdom is sitting on plenty of proven oil and gas reserves, but because of net zero policies of the Labour government, they are unable to tap into that more because they bought into the net zero follies. I hope if better leadership happens there, they reverse course. But Europe has a lot of proven reserves of oil and gas in many, many countries, but because of net zero dictates, they don't want to do it. So they're buying from us in the interim. I guess that's a healthy medium. I don't balk at that as an American. I think it's great. They want to buy from us, but they need to have domestic supplies too. They can't just rely on us. And I'm not saying that because we don't want their business, but it's a smart thing to have. Like, what happens if a future administration, if we get Democrats back in office, They change their policy on oil and gas development and even sharing technology for nuclear, geothermal, hydropower, etc. It's not just conventional, it's also smart, clean energy sources that actually work like that. So this is why Venezuela relates to the conversation here and to the podcast. As for biodiversity, this is how you know socialism is terrible, or central planning, collectivism, how you will. They all are the same. If you have the government involved dictating every facet of life, seizing the means of production, no private enterprise, not only people suffer, but also wildlife suffers as well. Let me remind what socialism does to wildlife as well. Do you all remember, dear listeners, the case study from 2017? I believe it was at the height of Maduro taking office, a little after Hugo Chavez died. I think a couple years into Maduro's reign of terror there. And if you famously remember, you could see horrible images and videos of poor, depraved, desperate people, Venezuelans, because they were experiencing food shortages, taking desperate measures. Again, very questionable things. I don't believe in theft and I don't think you should steal things. But because they were so destitute and desperate, they didn't have any food. So they went to zoos across the country, stole them, and ate them amid food shortages. Not only people were starving, Venezuelan wildlife was also starving too in the zoos. And let's see what wildlife conservation conditions were across the country since Maduro came to office illegally and stayed there. Venezuela's hungry hunt wildlife, zoo animals as economic crisis grows. That's another headline. That was from 2018. From November 2024, from a website that calls itself Manga Bay. As Venezuela's crisis rolls on, its wildlife is increasingly at risk. I was always told that socialists are great caretakers of nature. Baloney. What does this analysis say about the situation? Amid economic, political, and humanitarian crises, Venezuela has become a free-for-all for wildlife trafficking. What else does the article say here? The country is one of the world's most biodiverse, yet environmental concerns and wildlife preservation have largely gone neglected. Long-running international sanctions and newly passed anti-NGO law have also made it increasingly difficult, if not impossible, for conservation organizations to operate in the country. While there are real efforts to protect wildlife in Venezuela, the work of some zoos and breeding centers, massive conservation, are part of Venezuela's trafficking problem, reports have shown. A narco-terrorist state, not caretaking and caring for wildlife, much like it doesn't care for its people. In addition to wanting to see the privatization of oil and gas back in Venezuela, I hope true conservation efforts can go back there. NGOs, good NGOs, especially those in hunting and conservation, can go to Venezuela and help to restore and bring about conservation efforts there, because it is one of the most biodiverse places. There's hundreds of species of flora and fauna, I think maybe in the thousands, if I'm not mistaken. It's a beautiful country from what people have told me. I've never been. My friends who are Venezuelan have said it's beautiful. It has so much nature and biodiversity and wildlife. And it's such a shame, if even as an American looking on from the outside in, to see that socialists not only ruined economic conditions, energy conditions as well, invited energy scarcity, they also were poor managers of wildlife and wildlife conservation. This all goes hand in hand. That's why I think free market enterprise is far superior as a system. It works great. It helps people and nature. And I should probably write more about that, because I think with more people inclining to socialism, sadly, it needs to be said, and I can cite my family's experience. But I think from a wildlife conservation perspective, this needs to be honed in more. People forget this. And this case study in Venezuela is a perfect example of what happens with that. Ending on a more positive note with America250. As you all know, listening, America celebrating its 250th birthday on July 4th this year. Washington, D.C. and a lot of other places around the country are gearing up for celebrations. It was announced that the Salute to America, which was a really cool event in 2019 that I got to attend on the National Mall, public lands, that's a tie into this. And many public lands are going to be playing host to different America250 activities. That's why it's relevant to the podcast. The National Mall, which is managed by the National Park Service, where you see the Washington Monument, various different museums, Tidal Basin is nearby, all overseen by Department of Interior. And many other sites around the country, whether they're official national parks or close to the boundaries of national parks, BLM land, Forest Service land, and the like, they also are going to play host to different activities. The National Mall is going to play host to a lot of events in DC for America250, and the first one to kick off festivities was the illumination of the Washington Monument, hosted by an organization supporting America250 events called 250 Freedom. Kicking off on New Year's Eve, there was a fireworks show, and the organization, working in concert with Department of Interior, Secretary Burgum, National Mall, hosted an event where they showed projections and different illuminations of America's history from the founding to present day. It also was accompanied by narration going over each time period from the founding, the Constitution, different discoveries, manifest destiny, and other unique time periods that are hallmarks to America's greatness and America's ingenuity and our position as a global leader, freedom champions, conservation champions even too. There's a little bit of a tie-in there. I saw last night's show, caught a glimpse of the fireworks. My Uber was caught in traffic. I almost missed it. I got out of the tidal basin and I walked my way over to the Washington Monument, where I did get to see some glimpses of the fireworks, but I did not miss any of the show of the illumination happening on the Washington Monument. I saw a couple thousand people in front of me, next to me, and behind me throughout the National Mall, and it was not really cold. It was quite balmy. It was in the 40s, not super cold like typically it is in January here in the DC area. But what I loved observing was that people, yes, they were on their phones documenting the experience. It's really cool. I was guilty of that myself. But people were very friendly. They were so excited to see different projections on the National Monument, very excited about America250. I did not encounter any rude person. People were just so excited to be there at the mall because these activities usually don't happen in winter because it's cold. And living in this area, yes, it is corrupt. Yes, it has problems. I like the DC area because there's a lot of cool stuff like this happening. There's a lot of appeal to living here, not only because it's the power seat of government, but there are a lot of great activities to do, such as what I partook in last night. I have some posts on social media. I did a picture collage, and I'm going to do a video recapping some of the cool imagery I saw last night. So check that out on my personal social media accounts if you're interested, and it will also be on a post promoting this episode as well on the District of Conservation Instagram account and other related accounts as well. I should be going to some national parks this year. I need to buy another America the Beautiful pass. I had one a few years ago. I'm going to buy another one because it's a good deal, and I think I'm going to be hitting up a couple new national parks I had not gone to before sometime this summer. I hope you do too. It's $80 for Americans for the whole year to get into 500 plus properties, and it's a little more for those of you who are not in America, but it's still a reasonably priced purchase. I will talk about some of the activities happening for America250 on public lands as they come. There are a couple, like I said, there's the Salute to America. So if you're coming to Washington, D.C., Independence Day, that is something you will love to look forward to. It's a cool flyover of different military aircraft. You're on near the reflecting pool in front of Lincoln Memorial. It was such a great unifying event in 2019. I bet it's going to be bigger and better than ever this year. And there are going to be other supporting events, like I said, at the National Mall and around the country as well. So I will link to America250 festivities in and around the nation's capital. Please be sure to check those out. And if you come to DC and want to experience it, I hope you do, because it is a great time, especially during Independence Day. It's humid, there are mosquitoes, but it's a lot of fun spending 4th of July in Washington, D.C. And for America's 250th, it's going to be a raging good time. If you enjoyed this installment of District of Conservation, I would love to know your feedback. Send it my way. Please be sure to leave us reviews on Apple, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are played, and also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to never miss a beat nor a guest announcement. Thanks so much for listening to District of Conservation. I hope you have a wonderful day, and please share the podcast to those who may be interested in learning more about these critical natural resources, environment, energy issues.